Very appropriately, I'm drinking some coffee out of I put the Lit in Literature Shakespeare mug that my sister got me for Christmas. I thought I'd share that with you as we begin our reading review of Act Two in Macbeth. And I want to remind you of a familiar uh, leitmotif, right, throughout the play. It's a recurring theme or musical or literary composition associated with a particular person, idea, or situation. The refrain at the end when we meet the witches in Act One: what's fair is foul, and foul is fair. And that is a recurring leitmotif throughout the play when we think about the idea of appearances and realities. In the Act One Macbeth videos, I brought this notion up that duplicity, right? When characters are acting and appearing one way, but are a different way in reality. When people are going to deceive, they do so, right? With the notion of duplicity, right? Because no one's going to say, yes, I'm lying to you right now. Yes, right. I'm cheating on you. Yes, right. Again, it's this notion of duplicity. And Lady Macbeth invokes that in Act One as she continues to tell Macbeth that he has to appear one way, but in reality, right? Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. So again, as the play continues in Act Two, right? We see that Macbeth and Banquo have a conversation. Now, it's very important because this conversation, they discuss, right, the witches, right? Banquo says, I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you, they have showed some truth, right? And Macbeth says, yeah, we need to talk about this. And he says to Banquo, if you shall cleave to my consent, when 'tis, it shall make honor for you, right? Because now Macbeth, right, has become Cawdor. Remember, the witches said, right, Glom's Cawdor. So Banquo's saying, wow, they were right about the second prophecy, right? So interesting. And Macbeth says, yeah, well, if you, right, look at the translation, if you stick with me, if you shall cleave to my consent. I like the Shakespearean cleave to my consent. Notice that alliteration. It shall make honor for you. And Banquo says, so I lose none in seeking to augment it, but still keep my bosom franchised and allegiance clear, I shall be counsel. As long as I don't have to give up any honor to gain more honor. Banquo is a foil character to Macbeth because he's constantly doing the logical thing. He's thinking things through. He's reasoning it out. Whereas Macbeth is very easily given into illogical emotional appeals, his wife's fallacious arguments, and not only does his hubris fuel his illogical decision-making process, but so does his hidden assumptions. So the servant exits, and we have Macbeth ruminating one last time on the notion of what he has to do. And we see he hallucinates and he sees this bloody dagger. And again, remember, blood is a symbol of guilt because when one has blood on one's hands, it's a physical manifestation. Although it's a figurative expression, after he kills Duncan, he literally has so much blood on his hands and he wonders if he's going to be able to ever wash it off. We'll get to that moment in a minute here. So notice how he realizes as he's looking at the dagger, is the dagger a false creation or is the dagger real? And what does he say? Are all my senses deceiving me? Now, again, is he suffering from some sort of mental condition here? I think so. He calls it his heat-oppressed brain. So if you want to analyze Macbeth from a psychological perspective, it's ripe for such an analysis. We see the characters suffer from anxiety, they suffer from guilt, they suffer from paranoia. Again, he says, proceeding from thy heat-oppressed brain, I see thee yet in form as palpable as this which now I draw. Thou marshallest me the way I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools, oh, the other senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade in dungeon gouts of blood, which was not so before. And then he realizes there's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes, right? And as he moves forward at the end of the soliloquy, remember when the characters are sharing their ideas with us in these soliloquies, they're giving us their inner thoughts, right? So he's sharing a moment of mental instability with us, and he describes it very clearly. Now notice, right, he says, whilst I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. The more I think about this, the more Duncan still lives, and it's cooling my purpose. Now, a lot of times in life, people say, the more I think about it, I realize I shouldn't do it. So I'm just going to do it anyway and not think about it. That's kind of what he's saying here. It's not logical. If there's a cause for pause, indulge that cause, right? So, but again, he's Shakespeare. Notice how it rhymes, right? With the figurative language too. As we move on, right? The bell rings, right? Which is the sign that Lady Macbeth has drugged the guards and that they're ready, right? And he says, I go and it is done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. Again, we see this moment of hubris. He's recognizing that he is going to take Duncan's life. That's something that, regardless of whether or not you're religious, a creator should only have that power. So whenever, again, the whole notion of murder as an act of hubris, an act of playing creator, we don't need to say God, just playing creator, taking the life of another human being, right? And all of his thoughts that were foreboding and warning to him, they all seem like a self-fulfilling prophecy when he returns from the deed, right? Lady Macbeth tells us with omniscience here that she essentially drugged the guards, she roofied them, right? And she says, that which hath made them drunk hath made me bold, right? Again, when people drink alcohol, a lot of times they become bolder and they're more willing to do illogical things because it affects your critical thinking skills. A possible topic in essay 3 if you're dealing with addiction. So Macbeth comes back, right? And she says, right, I'm afraid. She immediately questions whether or not he had the guts to do it. As earlier she does in Act 1, her concerns are also validated in this scene, and her concerns become like a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. So she actually says, remember, she says she wants to stop up the access to remorse, but she tells us, if he didn't look like my father, I would have done it. It's a very interesting line, because has she been successful in removing her femininity and stopping up the access to remorse as she had hoped in her previous speech? I think this is a very interesting comment and something that you might want to analyze further if you're focusing on Lady Macbeth's psychological mindset. So when he comes back, we see that Macbeth, his hallucinations plagued him. He's hearing voices. It's very interesting because he says that they laughed in their sweet murder, that one cried, God bless us and amen, right? And then he tries to pray with them, but he can't. Of course, you can't pray. You're killing them, right? And she says, and so again, he's saying, I had most need of blessing and amen stuck in my throat. And she says, these deeds must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad. Possible foreshadowing, right? As the scene continues, right, Macbeth tells us he thought, again, the significance of sleep, because as the play moves on, they're both suffering from insomnia, which is a result of their guilty conscience, right? Their anxiety, they're unable to sleep. And when he says, right, he sleep no more, Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more, Macbeth shall sleep no more. it's interesting that he's referring to himself in the third person in a kind of multiple personality way, again, ripe for psychological analysis. But this notion that he will sleep no more, he, in some ways, I think, has killed a version of himself, the version of himself with a clear conscience, and therefore he cannot sleep. So this is yet another self-fulfilling prophecy. And she says, what's going on, right? What are you talking about? Get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hands. Get rid of the blood on your hands, right? And he says, I'll go no more. I'm afraid to think what I've done. Look on it again, I dare not. Because what did he do? He forgot to plant the daggers. So what does she have to do? She has to go back and fix it. She has to go back and finish. This makes her complicit in the act. She's no longer just the premeditated planner. Now she's going to have blood on her hands too. Now, notice she mocks him here, right? And again, she grabs the daggers, right? She goes back to plant them, and while she's gone, Macbeth tells us, as he's looking at his hands, we see this hyperbole, that figure of speech, that excessive exaggeration. He says, will all great Neptune's oceans wash this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. The symbolism of the blood. He's not going to be able to just wash it away. Even if he wanted to dunk his hands in the ocean, there's so much blood, it would make the green ocean red. And again, green could be a symbolic of nature, because what he's done is unnatural, and the blood is the symbolism, is symbolic of his unnatural act. He just murdered someone, right? So that physical witness, that physical manifestation, that's where the expression blood on your hands, it means you have a guilty conscience and you can't just wash it away. Remember, Lady Macbeth earlier says, just right, put a little water on your hands. That'll get rid of it. But no, he realizes that's not, right? So she comes in, and what does she say? My hands are of your color, but I shame to wear a heart so white. Right? Chastises him one more time, and his cowardice, right? Because she had to go clean up his mess, if you would, because he did not fulfill the plan. And as the scene ends, right? She has gone back and planted the daggers, so now they will await to what happens the next day when Duncan's body is discovered. So more on that to come. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you find these lectures helpful, not just from a critical thinking standpoint, but also from the perspective of using these as possible sources, possible fictional sources for Essay 3. So I think Macbeth could be a source that you use for almost any of those possible abstract terms from the Essay 3 prompt. So as always, let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching and listening. Until next time.